Hi, my name is Jonathan Wiese. Been a police officer for 22 years, currently assigned to the K-9 unit. It was a Saturday morning when I received a call on our scanner from Imperial Beach Sheriff's about a suicidal male. He had kidnapped his twin 2-year-old daughters from Imperial Beach and had threatened to drive off the Coronado Bridge. Later we got more information that he was possibly armed with a handgun, and the only information I had, he was driving a pickup truck. We later received information that they had a trace on his cell phone, getting him over to Hill Street in the Point Loma Sunset Cliffs area. So I drove to the area of Hill Street and Sunset Cliffs, and our field lieutenant, Lieutenant Dave Bautista, arrived shortly before me, and he found a pickup truck on the side of the road. And as soon as he approached that truck, the truck took off on a high rate of speed towards the cliffs. But without warning, the male drove his truck directly off the cliffs and landed into the ocean. I was the second to arrive behind Lieutenant Bautista, and together we ran out here to the cliffs. We looked over the bluff here and saw the truck was upside down and submerged underwater, where just the wheels and the undercarriage were sticking out. So my first thought was, please tell me the girls weren't in that truck, because I didn't think anyone could survive a crash like that. Then my second thought was, I need to figure out how to get down to that truck to make sure if there's anything I can do to save them, I'll do it. So I realized there was no quick way or safe way to get down this 50-foot drop. And then I started to remember that I had a 100-foot canine leash in my car that we have assigned for SWAT use. And I thought to myself, well, if it can hold my German Shepherd, maybe it'll hold me, and that's my only shot at this. So I ran back to my car, took off my uniform, my vest, and my gun belt, got the leash, and ran back to the side of the cliff here. So I found the shortest drop possible and started trying to figure out how I was going to get this leash to work. And then I saw numerous Western officers had arrived on scene. So as I was wrapping the leash around my chest, I pretty much threw the other end of the leash to these officers and just told them, hey, hold on, I'm going to go over the edge.
As soon as I arrived, I saw Officer Wiese. He had basically removed his entire uniform except his pants and a t-shirt, and he was running towards the cliffs with his dog leash in hand. So instinctively I just ran over to help him. He threw myself and a few other officers a leash, and we lowered him down the cliff so he could try to assess what happened and hopefully get the girls and the male out of the water.
And without preparation, without anything, these officers grabbed the leash, and I went off the edge and started going down. About halfway, I was hanging off the cliff. They wouldn't let me go. They didn't want to drop me, so I had to yell at them, hey, you got to let me go down the cliff.
As soon as we got there, I saw the barrier that leads out to the water was broken, and I couldn't believe it. The whole radio call itself was crazy, and I remember looking over the water into the edge, and I saw the car, and I saw a male holding his daughters. I saw Officer Wiese running straight. I looked like he was going to jump over the edge. He was like, get me down there. So me and some other officers, we held the leash, and one officer, he put it around this pole, and it was like the flimsiest pole you could find out there, but it was the only one. So I was like, well, it's better than nothing. And I didn't realize it was a dog leash until I was holding it in my hands. It was so flimsy and just so like, it was a dog leash. It was long and it did the trick, but I remember I was like, oh, I'm holding a dog leash. It wasn't a rope at all by any means.
So once I got to the rocks down below, I started making my way into the water, and I could see the male was now holding both girls in his arms. One was kind of holding on to him, and the other one didn't appear lifeless. She appeared lifeless. So my main goal was get to the water and get them out of the water, because they were going underwater from the waves. They were getting hit up against the cliff. So I made my way into where I swam out to them next to the truck. So I started thinking back to when I went to boot camp here at 17 years old at the Marine Corps, and our water safety class that we had. And I realized, okay, I can push the three of them, swimming them out of the water. So I managed to do that. I got them to the rocks.
Firefighters were running around, medics were running around, and I noticed that one of them kind of like dropped a backpack, like a gear bag, before running back to his rig up on the street side. And I just remember thinking, like, I'm not waiting for somebody else to do this. And so I took the bag, I dumped it out. It was filled with, like, ropes and random pieces of equipment. We're, like, trying to tie the bag to the canine leash, which is what Officer Wiese used to rappel down the cliffside. Officer Ian Flood grabbed onto the back of my duty belt, and I'm laying down, you know, trying to lower this leash with a backpack tied to the end. I started pulling up on the leash, and I remember being terrified because the backpack was really only big enough to cinch around, like, their necks, so their heads were still exposed from the backpack. And the backpack is kind of like teetering, you know, as you're pulling them up. So I remember being pretty scared that I was going to pull the leash the wrong way and they were going to fall out.
At that point, the officers and paramedics above had come up with a plan to throw me down a backpack, to stick her in a backpack, and they were going to hoist her up by the leash that I had come down on. So at that point, she was still pretty much lifeless and limp, and I'm sticking this 2-year-old in a backpack, and it's breaking your heart because I have a 2-year-old daughter at home, and I'm picturing my daughter, but I had to just get her up to the help as soon as possible. So I got her in the bag. They lifted her up.
I think Officer Flood had the front. He was pulling the bag up. I grabbed the kid, and I started to run up to the ambulance, but Sergeant Bells was right there, so I handed off the first child to Sergeant Bells, who ran up with Officer Franken to the ambulance so she could get some care, and threw the bag back down for the second child, and we did the same thing. Meantime, fire was trying to set up their rig so that they could go down over the cliff and hopefully bring up the dad. Second child, she was actually awake. She was crying a little bit. She was much more responsive, but she was fighting the bag a little bit on her way up, so we had to be careful with that. She was actually trying to climb out of the bag as we were pulling it up, so we were trying to get it up as fast as we could and grab her before she fell out of the bag. So she was definitely more responsive and more active than the first child.
On arriving at the scene, it was quite chaotic. There was a lot of officers already on scene when I got there. What I noticed was my sergeant at the time, Sergeant Bells, carrying a rather unresponsive child to one of the awaiting ambulances. I ran over with Sergeant Bells and jumped into the back of the ambulance with 3 of the firefighters and both children and myself. Once inside the ambulance, I assisted the firefighters in their resuscitation efforts of one of the girls. At the time, she was very unresponsive, had difficulty breathing on her own, very shallow breathing, which initially was difficult to detect. So I assisted in the breathing resuscitation efforts with her as the firefighters were attempting to insert both their IVs and other medication to kind of jumpstart her again. One of the other children was being cradled by one of the firefighters in basically the captain's chair. She was pretty responsive, crying the entire time, looked like she had escaped fairly uninjured, that we knew of at the time, just from preliminary assessments from those firefighters. The other girl who was in the gurney was the more severe of the two. It was a long drive. I think it was only about 5 or 6 minutes in an ambulance up to Children's Hospital from Sunset, probably closer to 10 to be honest. But it felt like a very long time because you don't know what's happening with these girls internally or the circumstances that led up, and you also don't know what you're going to find out when you get to the hospital. Following the incident, you just kind of have to sit back and reflect on how much worse it could have been, because from the information we got when we first got to the hospital as it was being fed in from the scene, those girls were unrestrained in the vehicle as it went off the side of a very large embankment at a high rate of speed.
And we loaded them up into the ambulance. I went with them to the hospital, and luckily, the doctors do what they do, and the girls are both okay, which is nothing short of a miracle to me.
Afterwards, going home, just an adrenaline dump. Trying to relax because I think it was our Friday, and trying to relax and go to sleep I probably didn't go to sleep for another 3 or 4 hours, just trying to comprehend everything that had just happened, with the dad driving over the cliff with his 2 kids in his lap, not caring about them, not caring about himself, and trying to make sense of why.
I mean, I needed a couple minutes alone just to breathe, because I felt like the whole time I wasn't breathing. I wasn't focusing on my breathing. But like I said, seeing those girls awake really brought some life back into me after seeing all that.
Yeah, so the first thing I did when I got home that morning was I grabbed my 2-year-old daughter, my 4-year-old son, and I gave them some big hugs because, you know, I need to feel them in my arms. But then, of course, their first words were, you know, "Dad, why are you wet?" And I told them I had gone swimming, and the look of disappointment in their eyes that I went swimming without them. So that afternoon, after I woke up and calmed down, we actually had to go swimming in our pool.